Hi guys, Darren from Venom Fluid Art here. Today, I'm just having a bit of a play day while I'm recovering from COVID. Gotta love that little bug, let me tell you. So I haven't painted in 2 weeks now. So I figured today's the day and we'll have a bit of a play. Now, all my paints I usually leave in little plastic tubs that are airtight. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's airtight or not. Any of the tube paints that are in there are going to thicken up. The pigments that you use tend to fall out of suspension and get rather thin because all the heavy pigment drops to the bottom and all the light stuff floats to the top. So what we're going to do today, for a bit of fun, is just see if consistency really is key. Because we hear that quite a lot. Consistency is key. But is it really? Let's find out. So, what I'm going to do is grab some fluorescent orange, which is a Barnes fluorescent pigment. Right, so we're going to put that down first. That seems to have held up quite well after being locked up for 2 weeks on its own, the poor little thing. So we'll throw some of that down first. Got some Submarine by this little piggy. Now, that you can see is quite thick. A lot thicker than what the orange was. So we'll throw that down. I think we'll throw down some Funk by this little piggy, which is another pigment. Now all I'm doing is giving it a bit of a stir. Make sure everything floats back up where it should be. So that one there is not quite as thick as the yellow. Tends to run off the stick a lot better. So I'm just randomly going through the pile here, seeing what we got. Okay, we've got a Tebio, which is a tube paint. Now that is like glue. So that one thickened right up. Any of the tube paints really tend to thicken up. So what I'm going to do is put it down anyway. What else do we have here? We have some Lakeside by this little piggy, which is a pigment. Give it a bit of a stir. Yeah, that one's not too bad. So we've got thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin. We'll just see what actually is going to happen. So this one's Hustle. That's roughly where I usually have it anyway. As far as consistency goes. I like my colours a little thicker anyway, they don't muddy up. I've found that if I use thicker colours, they tend to dry a lot better. They don't mud into each other as much. So as it dries, you see a lot of the ones where they sink and turn into mud. Whereas if it's a little bit thicker, I tend not to get that. We'll go with another Pebeo. Now that one's thick as well. As you can see, it's like glue. Yeah. And I'll throw some yellow down again. Why not? Now this yellow is half tube paint and half neon pigment. Now what I'm going to do is grab some black cell activator. Throw a bit of that down. And for giggles, I'm going to grab some what's this one? Mermaid by this little piggy. Throw a little bit of that down. Yep, on top of the cell activator. Go figure. Why not? Because we can. Now I'm going to get some grunge, which is a fluoro green. Add a little bit of that. We're going to throw some Amsterdam. What was this? Ultra Deep Marine Blue, I think it was. The cell activator. Right, so throw some of that down. Not too worried about any bubbles that are there. If you are, just grab a little torch, give it a pop. Grab my mini blower. So after having Rona, I have no lung capacity whatsoever. It sucks. Right, so we'll blow this out. These little things take a while to get used to, blowing out balloons and things like that. Definitely fun, that. So that'll do for what we're doing. Grab a straw, give inside that middle bit a bit of a blow. Alright. Skewer, a little bit of a play around the edges. Don't need to, I just like to. Oh, the crazy patterns it leaves. Alright, so as far as it blowing out, it really hasn't made much difference whether the paint was thick or the paint was thin. You'll see in certain sections where, like here, where the paint was really thin, it muddies up. So if all the paints were a lot thicker than you'd usually go, you get away with it a lot easier. So when everything's too thin, everything sinks through your pillow. As it dries, it gets muddier and muddier, and all the colours blend into each other, and it looks like crap. So, whereas if you go thicker, obviously not as thick as some of them ones that I put down, you can tend to get away with it. Colours are thicker, you're going to have to blow a little bit harder. No big deal. Especially if you use a mini blower, it doesn't really matter. It just makes life easy. Alright, give it a bit more of a spin. Alright. Put it up. So where we've had really thick colours, you've got nice cells. Where you've had thin colours mixed in, you see it start to muddy up. Like in through here. So realistically, you're better off having thicker colours than thinner colours. So what we'll do is set that to one side, let it dry, and you'll be able to see the dried results of that. Just scrape off this excess from underneath. Cell activator thickness makes a big difference too. So if you're using, say, 3:1, you'll notice that you get more defined cell lines. If you go 5:1, they tend to sink really quick and you lose all your lines, which I should have had in one of my other videos, I'm pretty sure I do. You'll be able to check that out. But yeah, I usually stick around 3 or 4:1 for a cell activator. 9 times out of 10 it works perfect, depending on the brand obviously. If you use a Atelier, you might have to go a little bit more heavy-handed on the water or Floetrol or whatever you're using, because that's quite a heavy body paint. But all in all, it's still a bloom, still looks cool. We'll see how that one dries. Alright, I figured we'd do the same thing with a swipe as well. That way you can see how thick and thin paints react for a swipe. So we'll give it a whirl and see what happens. So that one there, is roughly about what the consistency is I use anyway. Leaves a couple of second trays. Now this green is thicker. Submarine, that's pretty thick too. But still within the ballpark of what I'd usually use. So like I said, I like all my stuff thick. Holds the colour better. Now, Pebeo, that one's quite thick. Yep, but it really is. I really should have thinned that one down, but as you can see just how thick that really is. Oh, it is thick as. So but will it make a difference? No, it won't. I found that with swipes, if the colour is a little bit too thick, or like that one really thick, your cell activator tends to slide across the top of it rather than sink into it. So that can give you a pretty cool effect, because you'll get like solid sections of colour rather than cells through it. Now if your colours are way too thin, you're going to have all sorts of dramas anyway, because you'll see the colours start to bleed around the edges. It's very similar to as if you've put cell activator down. So cell activators are really thin. So if you lay some down, one, you see to start to sink straight away, but the edges bleed. It does the same thing when your colours are too thin. You put the colours down and the edges bleed, they're too thin. So that's one telltale little sign to look for. If your colours are too thin, they're going to bleed colour. Especially if you lay one side by side with another colour, you tend to pick it up really quick. You'll know straight away that one's bleeding into the other. So that one's pretty thick. So there you go, we've got 6 ends, mixed bag of no consistency whatsoever. Alright, where's my little swiper tool? Good question. There it is. Found it. Cross is averted. So we'll put some cell activator on that. Might throw some blue. A little bit of black as well. Why not? Like so. What I'm going to do is put a loop back through. Just fun. Black down this one. you see when your colours are thick, you can actually drag your colours through each other. And you'll get solid coloured lines through, like that. That's just because they're thicker than you'd usually run them. That's how I get away with laying certain colours side by side with each other. Now you'll see one of the colours was really thin and it's muddied up. So where your colours are too thin, they mud. Stick with thicker, you don't get the problem. Same with that Pepio purple that I put down, that was really thick. You can see where the cell activator skipped clean across the top and hasn't sunk through it properly. So if it's too thick, you're going to have dramas. If it's too thin, you're going to have dramas. You need to find a happy medium. Ratios for happy mediums won't help you. It really needs to be a visual thing. You know, a ratio will get you somewhere in the ballpark, but nowhere near close enough, because every different colour, every different brand all have different ratios they need, because they're all different. So a lot of it comes down to experience. Alright, so you'll notice we've got muddy sections. That's where things are too thick or too thin. Mainly too thin. Especially if it's a really thin thing that sits beside a thick thing. If that makes any sense. So it pays to roughly keep all your paints as close to the same consistency as you can, whether they be all really thick or really all, well, you don't want them all thin because it's just going to turn to mud. So find a happy medium. That's the best advice I can give you anyway. Happy medium works well. So now we've spun that one out. You can still get away with murder with swipes and blooms. But if you make your colours on the thicker side, you can get away with a hell of a lot more than if everything's too thin. Because when things are too thin, your colours are going to sink straight through the pillow. It's all going to turn to mud, and you're not going to be happy tomorrow when you have a look at it. So there is a mixing video that I've got there that shows roughly what the consistency of your paint is that I use. Now, there's a couple of seconds trace as it sits on the top of the paint. When you scoop it back in, that seems to work really well for me. Obviously different pillow paints are going to make a difference as well, because if your pillow's too thin, it's going to let all your paint sink through your pillow paint too, which will give you muddy looking colours, and everything blends into each other and you lose all your pigment and it ends up looking like crap. So there you go. That's with thick and thin. Even though we lost some of the colour here, it still looks pretty good. You can get away with that. Alright, we'll put that to one side, see how it dries overnight, and then I can show you the results.
Okie dokie. It's the following day. This is the bloom we did. So, held up quite well. But, like I showed you before, where the colour was thin, in this section here, it muddied up. So, still doesn't look too bad, but yeah, the colour definitely muddies up when it's too thin. So, that's that one. And the swipe is this one. Now that was where the colour was too thick and the cell activator didn't really sink through it real well. So it lost a fair bit of the lacing and cells. But as you can see, all the rest of it still looks good. So as far as consistency goes, if you stick with thicker colours, which I'll show you a little clip of how thick mine are compared to how thick my pillow paint is, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm using. So, but yeah, stick with thicker colours, everything gels a lot nicer. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll pop up the little drip test and I can show you that.
Here I've got pillow paint. That's Funk by this little piggy, Lakeside, this little piggy, and my own version of Show Pony. This is the consistencies that they are straight out of the container. You notice the Show Pony is a little bit too thick. So I thin that out with a tiny little bit of Joe Sonia and a little drop of water. But also another thing you'll notice is my pillow paint is actually thinner than my colours. So, not by much, but enough. When you're mixing your colours, that's what you want to go for. Those two there, you want them to run at the same speed. And you can only do that with practice. The more you practice, the better you get at it. Alright, so I know the pillow paint at that consistency works perfect, straight out the can, first go, every go, never skips a beat. And if I keep my colours slightly thicker than the pillow, they turn out perfect every time. That one there's too thick. Like I said, I'd thin that out a little, just so it keeps up with those two. So, your best bet's just have a bit of a play. Try and get all your consistencies the same. You know, even if you get your pillow paint might be a little bit thicker than mine. Keep all your colours roughly the same as what your pillow paint is. It's going to work no matter what. So, have a crack, have a play. Alright, I'll show you the dried results on those things, and you can have a look at that.
Alright, so there you go. That's just a little video on consistency. Does it really matter? Well, not really. If you go too thin, you're going to have dramas. If you go way too thick, you're going to have dramas. If you find a happy medium in between where you can get nice solid lines, solid colours, without everything sinking and turning to mud, you're going to win no matter what you do. So my recommendation is use thicker colours. Obviously not as thick as that Pebeo one that I showed you there, but yeah. Best way is watch the video where I actually mix the pigments and the tube paints. If you stick to that, you're going to be in the ballpark. That's the easiest way. Alright guys, hope that helped. Have fun, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.